Hello, everyone. I'm Steph Hodgins-May. I'm a Green Senator for Victoria, and I am delighted to be joined by my colleague, my Victorian State Parliament colleague, Anasina Gray-Barberio, our early childhood education portfolio holder in the Victorian Parliament, and Maddie from the Parenthood, who I've come to know quite well. They're an amazing advocacy organisation. I'll allow them to introduce themselves when we get to them. Just going to take a breath. I've had a very testing night with two youngsters who I think have just fallen asleep. Yes, if you could see how frantic the 5 minutes was before jumping on this call, I think you would be surprised. But yeah, really appreciate you joining us on a Monday evening. We have got a great conversation ahead of us, but before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are all dialing in and zooming in from stolen land, unceded Aboriginal land, and pay my deep respects to elders past and present. I'm on Boonwurrung country, and just acknowledge the incredible connection to country that our First Nations people have, and the need to centre First Nations justice in all of the work that we do. It's been a trying time, but I was really encouraged by some of the incredible Aboriginal activists that were in Parliament over the last fortnight, really taking their arguments to the Parliament on predominantly, well, we're talking about environmental issues, but just so much strength and resilience in the face of what's been a pretty icky couple of years for them. So please do feel free to drop into the chat where you're dialing in from. And also, if you'd like to do a quick introduction in the chat, feel free to do that as well. But yes, I'm Steph Hodgins-May. I've been a senator for the Greens for about a year now, and I managed to get the early childhood education portfolio when I joined. Got two young children, one who is 2 and still in childcare, and a 7-year-old as well. Also got the resources, democracy, and assistant climate energy portfolios. And it's been a big time in the early childhood education space, and we'll get into that a little later. But first, I'd like to throw to Anasina to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Steph, and good evening, everybody. My name is Anasina Gray-Barberio. I'm the Greens MP for Northern Metro, and I sit in the Legislative Council, and also hold the portfolio for early childhood and child protection. I too would like to acknowledge that I'm on Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country, and I pay my deep respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge the work of our First Nations people in their journey for treaty here in Victoria and how important that is. And we always try and bring a decolonised lens to our work here at State Parliament alongside Steph and our federal colleagues. And really looking forward to the chat this evening. Thanks so much for having me along.
Thanks, Anasina. And over to you, Maddie.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm Campaign Director at the Parenthood. Thanks for having me along tonight. The Parenthood is a national advocacy organisation for parents and carers, and we campaign on a few different issues, but mostly at the moment on early childhood education and care, which, as you all know, has been in the news a lot lately. I'm also joining from Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country. There can be no early education justice without First Nations justice, and I encourage people to check out the great work that SNAKE does as well. And they, in a recent media release, really highlighted how for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, they are most safe in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community-controlled early years services.
Thank you so much, Maddie. And I can see former MP Sue Pennicue on the call, and I'm remembering I haven't replied to a text from you, Sue, about this exact issue. So thank you for joining us. And thank you, Maddie and Anasina. So look, we're all aware of the horrific reports that have been coming out of Queensland just last week, and Anasina and Maddie's home states of Victoria. I do just want to do a trigger warning that there might be some discussion around some tough issues tonight. So we'll drop some information in the chat if you do need any further information around how you can get support, or if you do find this discussion triggering. But we're really hoping to have a discussion about what as Maddie said, it's been in the news recently. What have some of the structural issues that we're encountering in the childcare system? What these most recent reforms might do to improve the situation, but ultimately what's left to do to really pave the way for a genuinely high quality universal early childhood education care system. So I just want to acknowledge the incredible work of the educators too in this space. They just do the most phenomenal work, really in really challenging circumstances, underpaid and don't have adequate conditions to do session planning, all of those sorts of things. And I know it's been a tough time for the educators as well. So hats off. Can I get it? Is anyone here an educator? Oh, great, Bronnie. Lovely to have you here, and Pretty, great. Well, welcome and thank you for all that you do. And we're going to have an opportunity for Q&A later in the discussion as well. So please do keep your questions in your back pocket. I often find Q&A the most interesting part, so we'll try not to talk at you for too long. But to kick off, Anasina and Maddie, I was hoping you might just give us a little bit of context setting for those who aren't aware of how the childcare safety and quality, how they're regulated at a state level and a federal level, and how you think that might be contributing to some of the issues that we're encountering.
Would you like me to go first, Maddie? Is it all right? Yeah, okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So being at the state level, obviously each jurisdiction might differ, but in the Victorian context, the regulator is also known as the Quality Assessment Regulator Division. So they are the regulator here in Victoria that sits within the Department of Education. So not only do you have an educator that is in charge of funding, they're also in charge of monitoring and regulating the sector. And we feel there is a conflict of interest there because there is no independent oversight body to ensure that the current regulator as it stands in Victoria has any independence, has any transparency and accountability. What we've been seeing uncover here in Victoria, sadly, are failings in the system and the structure as it stands. It's really hard for Quad, that's the abbreviate, the acronym for the regulator here in Victoria. And so because you don't have any independent oversight, there's no transparency for Victorian parents, for early childhood educators about how they are monitoring, how they are upholding child safety standards. So that's how the regulator operates here in Victoria. You also have the Commission for Children and Young People, who sits outside of the Department of Education, that also plays a role as well in upholding child safety standards, especially in relation to organisations that deal with children on the front lines of that. And that includes the early childhood sector. I guess we'll go more into that a little bit later, but I just wanted to paint the picture. That's how the regulator stands here in a Victorian context.
Thank you, Anasina. And Maddie, did you want to give a quick overview of federal?
Yeah, so as Anasina said, there are state and territory regulators, and then we also have a national quality framework which provides a national approach to regulation, assessment and quality improvement for most services. My understanding is some of those services fall outside of that accreditation. And we'd like to know why, but we're unable to find out why so far. A key element of this is then the National Quality Standard, which identifies 7 quality areas that are considered important for outcomes for children, and services are rated against these 7 areas. So that could be like children's health, there's education, there's staffing arrangements. And then there's a national body called ASIQA, which guides the implementation of the National Quality Framework and then works with the regulators, but it's the regulators who assess and rate the services and monitor compliance as well. And they have been chronically underfunded, these regulators. And I mean, I think just from what Anasina was describing and what I'm now describing, you can probably tell it is fairly patchwork and it's complex and complicated. So it's no surprise that, children's safety is just falling through all of these gaps.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. And certainly that complexity. I've just been even in the Parliament last week when the bill was getting close to passing and we're in committee stage and, trying to ask questions of the minister who's a new minister. And but just that reliance on saying, oh, no, sorry, that's state and territory responsibility, that's not federal. And I think we see it right across the education system and the health system as well, but that kind of buck passing that doesn't help anyone. But Anasina, obviously, as we know, we've mentioned those devastating allegations out of Victoria. Can you give us a little bit of a snapshot of what the Vic government has done in response to that, and the efficacy of, you think, that the response so far?
Yeah. So the Victorian Labor government have recently announced a rapid review, what they're calling a rapid review, and that's a 6 to 7 week review that they have launched to look into, I guess, the early childcare system and how it's working and where the gaps are, and how to, I guess, take a broader look at the system. However, this rapid review fails to look and investigate what the role of the regulator that I just spoke about before, Quad, the role that the current regulator plays in ensuring that children's safety is always paramount, is always front and centre of decision making in early childcare centres, but also in compliance and risk assessments. So the rapid review itself has got some gaping holes. They've also recently announced a register for early childhood educators. Now they are managing the rollout of this through tranches. So they're going to do an initial stage where it won't actually capture all childhood educators. So right now it leaves out a big portion of early childhood educators that I guess are currently in the sector on a casual basis. So it doesn't even capture that in the first tranche. And we know that in the Victorian context, sadly, it's such a highly casualised sector. That's the nature of the sector at the moment. So, and they're also going to be looking into the review of the Working with Children's check as well. So there's a few things that the government has rolled out, and I just do want to emphasise, while we welcome these changes, we don't believe they go far enough.
Yeah, thank you, Anasina. And as I touched upon, we passed federal laws last week that the Greens supported that legislation, which essentially gave the government the ability to remove or to suspend the subsidy, childcare subsidy, from providers who weren't or aren't meeting national quality standards. And there's still a lot that hasn't really, like, we haven't received really many assurances around what the threshold is for them to suspend that subsidy, nor had really clear assurances around which information they'll publish for parents to give them that kind of knowledge when they're sending their child to a centre as to whether there have been any breaches or conditions applied to them. But we'll continue to interrogate that as the legislation is implemented, which should be fairly immediate. But look, we did support that legislation. Similarly, the Greens didn't think it goes far enough, and we'll talk more about really what our ideal system looks like. But Maddie, what was the view of the Parenthood in relation to that legislation? And I suppose, do you think that more proactive leadership is required on that front?
Yeah, well, look, we commend the federal government on taking swift action, as well as the Victorian government and the whole of Parliament, just really recognising that clearly improvements need to be made for children's safety. However, we do think that it doesn't go far enough. We want to make sure that we don't implement too many just knee-jerk measures. There are a lot of measures right now that are on the table, for example, mandatory child safety training for staff, that will definitely improve the situation, but we need national oversight and leadership on this issue.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose just for folks on the call, you might have seen that Anthony Albanese has said that he was asked what he wants his legacy piece to be, and he has said a universal early childhood education and care system. So I think what we've seen so far this term is, to begin with, it looked like the last election, before the election, we were really hoping and expecting some sort of big announcement in the early childhood education space. And government did announce about $1 billion to go towards addressing childcare deserts. Well, so they say, but we haven't seen much around how that money is going to be spent and distributed. But something that we pushed for and the Greens pushed for and Parenthood joined us in calling for in the lead up to the election was a national ECEC commission. It was recommended by the Productivity Commission in their report last year. And essentially what we think is missing is a national body that basically not only is responsible for gathering all of the information, for monitoring workforce, for monitoring the national quality standards and whether they're being adhered to, it's also set up to create the foundations to move us towards a genuinely universal system. And look, I don't think there's the Greens have consistently campaigned for early childhood education to be universal, to be free, and to be treated just like primary and secondary school. We hear that so much of children's brains development happens in the 2 years before they start school, in the first 4 years of their lives. And we're just astonished that it's become this industry that it has become. We're seeing ASX listed private providers and often corners being cut. I know there are some great for-profit providers out there, so I'm told. I'm fortunate enough to have some great council-run facilities in our area, although we have to fight every budget to keep them. But I think this Early Childhood Education and Care Commission is something that the sector, so I know the Parenthood supports, and I'll throw to you in a moment, Maddie, to speak about that. But similarly, we have heard some sort of whisperings from the government that they perhaps will see it as a medium-term priority, we don't know what medium means. Does that mean this election cycle or the next? But Maddie, what do you think a commission could do, I suppose, to tie up some of the loose ends that we're and genuinely pave that way towards a system that we can all be proud of?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head, that it's not just about kind of repairing all of the major issues we have right now with the system, but about also setting us on the pathway to universal early learning. And I do just want to do a shout out to the Front Project. I saw Rachel from
yes, Rachel
on the call, and so much of their work has informed our understanding of a national commission and why it is needed. They do absolutely excellent work in this space. Yeah, look, because a national commission would provide that oversight to ensure that regulators are properly funded, that they're ensuring that there is, high standards of quality and safety, and also could look into what the early childhood education sector needs in order to ensure that we don't have high turnover of staff, that we just have highly professional and qualified staff in all of our centres. But beyond that as well, they could also ensure that there's a clear division of roles and responsibilities between all three levels of government, even local government, as well. As you just said, Steph, they do run a lot of services. And we also need to address not only safety and quality, but also access, affordability, inclusion. There are just so many pieces to this puzzle that's what a national commission could do. And as you know very well, Steph, I'm very passionate about getting access to early learning in regional, rural and remote Australia. And right now, the way the market's set up, it's completely failing the regions. And that's what a commission could work towards as well. So we just need to really take a holistic view of early learning and care in Australia, and a commission, by being a national but also independent body, could hopefully provide that impetus to get governments doing the right thing and continuing to do the right thing, and as well as supporting all children in the country, also fully funding Aboriginal community controlled services.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good to me. And it really, just the longer you're working in this space, and I'm sure the educators can relate, everything is so connected. You go down the workforce rabbit hole and you discover, oh, hang on, there's issues around pay and conditions, and you go, and everything connects, whether it be quality, whether it be affordability. It really needs a holistic approach rather than those sort of piecemeal bits and pieces that we're feeling and experiencing. But I suppose the other thing to say around the new legislation that went through is that it won't really do anything to lift quality nationally. Like, it will crack down when maybe things aren't going as they should. For one example they provided is if that, there's a big chain of providers who a certain percentage of certain percentage of them aren't meeting national quality standards. They might not permit them to open a new centre until they are, but we really need to be lifting quality across the whole system, and we simply won't do that. And I think there is some fear because it's a big reform project that needs to happen, but it's also just such an opportunity. And I know, thank you, Rachel, for joining us. The Centre for Policy Development have also been doing some really interesting work on how it leads to productivity growth, having, a really strong and robust early childhood education and care system. And Asina, at a state level, what do you think you mentioned that some of those regulators have been under-resourced, but I suppose what are you hoping that the inquiry might come out with that might improve the policy framework for our young people in Victoria?
Yeah, so just to update everybody, as of last week in Parliament, the Greens were able to secure a powerful parliamentary inquiry. And this is to allow more transparency and accountability into how the early childhood sector. And it's also an opportunity for the Victorian public to participate in the inquiry, whether that be Victorian parents, educators, academics, experts in the field. It will really invite a broad perspective of voices, not only to address the challenges that are currently faced by the early childhood sector, but also to invite solutions as well. So currently, it sits with the regulator. The regulator has no oversight, so we don't know how they're actually processing complaints or making sure that they're monitoring at a high level. All those sort of questions go unanswered. But a parliamentary inquiry that we've been able to secure through the Parliament last week allows for more transparency, and it will be able to answer questions that parents, that's on everybody's mind. How did this happen? And how do we stop it from happening again? So it's never horrific, cases that's happened. Like, let's call it for what it is, and it's sexual violence against babies and 3-year-olds. That's the age that was reported. And these are, like, as a mom, our most vulnerable babies that don't have the language to articulate what is happening to them. And we've spoken to lots of parents, and as well as the Front Project and Parenthood and a few other organisations as well, to help us formulate our response, and educators, to ensure that all the voices that's in the sector are included in the inquiry that we put forward to Parliament last week. Because we're really at a crossroads. The early childhood educators have been sounding the alarm for quite some time that there is urgent reform needed in early childhood. And, quite sadly, we're at this crossroads where governments now cannot turn their backs. They can, like you said, Maddie, it's not the time for knee-jerk reactions, piecemeal solutions. It's really time for structural change and transformation to ensure that children's safety is paramount, but also the confidence and trust of parents, which is completely shattered at the moment in a sector. For so many parents, it's not a choice to drop their kids off to childcare. It's not a luxury, like they need to, so that they can get to their jobs. So the inquiry will be one powerful tool that we can use to bring about some structural change that's urgently needed.
Yeah, thank you, Anasina. And I think each of these issues that we're talking about, another issue that it kind of comes back to is that childcare subsidy system, and how we don't think it's actually fit for purpose. We don't think that it gives government enough control over the kind of quality and the settings under which these new providers come through. It kind of tangles parents' lives up with Centrelink, when we believe it should be like education. You drop your kid off at early childhood education, and you leave them there, and you're not straddled with massive bills. And becomes a decision as to whether you send them there based on, your postcode, whether you can even get childcare, and then whether you can afford it. And so, we've been, I think it was $16 billion in the last year went through the childcare subsidy scheme, through subsidies to many, many for-profit providers. I think 95% of providers that have come through in the last decade have been for-profit providers. And that's a huge amount of public money with very little oversight and little control from the government. So we did go to the election as well with a plan to remove the childcare subsidy system. And I would highlight that Maddie and Rachel's work was a really, I think, big part of that, of the case for moving away from a subsidy system. But Maddie, can you tell us a little bit about the Parenthood's views on that? And Rachel, I might even throw to you if you'd like to contribute around the subsidy. I know it's been a big part of your work. Feel free to make a contribution as well.
Yeah, we would welcome for Rachel to jump in if she wants to. But yeah, I mean, for anyone who's put their child through the early learning system, you probably know what an absolute nightmare it is to try and negotiate the childcare subsidy. And it honestly feels like every part of the system is that overly complicated and burdensome. And so that funds basically kind of long day care and much of the early learning system, but preschool and kindergarten are funded by state and territory governments. So again, we've got this kind of overlap of roles and responsibilities from governments. And because the childcare subsidy is a demand-driven model, we're seeing an oversupply in metro and higher socioeconomic areas, and we're seeing a total undersupply in lower socioeconomic areas and across the regions. And so it's essentially a profit motivator, and it actually drives up out-of-pocket costs for parents and carers. It really doesn't achieve what it sets out to do. And as you said, Steph, the federal government spends billions of taxpayer dollars on this system, which could really just go instead to direct funding to services. And look, along with the right settings under a national commission, say, that would mean that there would be appropriate supply across the whole of the country. There could be a potential fixed fee model for parents and carers. So say only pay $10 a day for most families, free for lower income families. And funding could also be conditional. So services would have to be high quality. They'd have to pay their workers appropriately. And they could also source additional funding where needed. For example, if they have children with disabilities attending the service. So just we would like to see funding reform to ensure that it's just appropriately funded and again, it just kind of calls back to this holistic picture of the whole system.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. Did you want to jump in, Rachel?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for hosting tonight and having this really important conversation. I myself have a little one in a actually for-profit long day care service. One of those really high quality ones. And then we're also part of a beautiful community run kindergarten that I'm on the parent governing committee of. So I experienced many parts of the system as a parent and then also have the fortune of working at the Front Project. I guess I would tie this back to the idea of a commission and the importance of that. And when we look at such a critical gap at the moment, it's that there is nobody that is taking leadership of the entire system to stand back and say, okay, who's doing quality in long day care? Okay, who's responsible for workforce development? There's little piecemeal approaches across different Australian states and territories, but nobody is looking at the whole, and that's where some of the gaps are. So if there's a commission there that can articulate what is our vision, what are we looking to achieve, affordable, accessible, inclusive, could probably all in this room agree on a bunch of them. And I dare say so could the government. And then once that's articulated, you could look at, okay, what's the best way to fund this system? And, you have an independent body that's drawing on all this, pulling together all the evidence. Data sharing is a big problem across the country as well. So they could do data-driven insights to make decisions. So, yeah, I think in terms of the funding model, and yes, can confirm as a parent, CCS is an absolute nightmare to navigate. There's a really big question around the funding model, and if we're looking to achieve a universal system, is it fit for purpose? Yeah, there's a case definitely for saying no there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rachel. It's so good having amazing stakeholders in this space because we lean so heavily on them every time some legislation or, a reactive decision is made by government. But one other thing we did manage to get through that I'll point to in the last term of Parliament was to abolish the activity test and guarantee 3 days of childcare for all children. And I think there was about 100,000 plus children from disadvantaged or low socioeconomic backgrounds who weren't guaranteed ECEC and now are. So that was one of the better reforms. A 2-year pay increase also passed in the last term of Parliament, but we were very anxious about that, and the implementation of it we've heard hasn't been particularly good, and there has been no guarantee that will be continued to be funded after 2 years' time, which I cannot imagine happening to a non-feminised industry. Like, I really cannot imagine the government proposing something like that with no marker of what happens next. So those issues are in our sights in the next term of Parliament as well. But look, I might throw to questions and answers, because I think that's where things get more interesting. But I will say, if you are going to drop off in the next half hour, please, and you were wondering what you can do to really kind of help us move towards an early childhood education and care commission, move away from the subsidy system, strengthen quality and safety, lift those standards nationally. We're going to drop some information into the chat, including some petitions, and do write to your local MP, do call them. We've got a government, I think, at the moment who what they're doing at the moment is implementing the promises they made last term, but they haven't actually come into this term with any big, bold reform agenda. And so we need to make this the opportunity for that. And, they've got record numbers in the lower house. They've got the Greens willing to work with them and create that passage for legislation to pass in the Senate. So we have an opportunity in this term of Parliament to get some really great progressive stuff done, particularly around childcare, environment, I'm hoping, as well, because that's just as important for our little ones to grow up in a safe planet. But every phone call that you make, every letter that you write, every email that you write does help us put it on the agenda. And we would love for the Prime Minister to be able to boast about his legacy being a genuinely high-quality universal system. So let me just figure out how I get to these questions. Here we go. All right, I've got a question from Bronnie. So what is the time frame of potentially changing the Working with Children check blue card for Queensland to a national register for all educators, but also for anyone dealing with children? In Queensland, I'm automatically exempt from a blue card due to my registration with college teachers. I had no reference. At the time when I moved here. That creates a safety hole. Gosh, that's quite a specific one. Maddie or Rachel, do you have any knowledge on that you're willing to jump in within the Queensland context? Or Bonnie, feel free to...
I'm not. No. Yeah, sorry.
No, I'm just explain it.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I am an educator. I have multiple degrees across all sectors of education. And when I came to Queensland, I hadn't worked in 7 years due to having a child. And I registered with the College of Teachers. All I had to show was basically my certificates that I had teaching degrees, and I was automatically accepted. There was no police check, there was no nothing. Because of that registration, I don't actually need what is a blue card, but is a Working with Children check. So when I have now gone into independent schools, casuals, things like that, I'm automatically exempt. I'm also automatically exempt at any sporting events because of this registration. The problem being, and I have experience with this because my son was physically harmed, without a criminal record, people can change states, and without them checking, they can get a blue card or they can get an exemption because they are with the College of Teachers. So this is part of my problem because I know a number of people who have done that. I know someone who harmed my son who has done that. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm trying to understand is that when is there going to be a complete across all sectors, across the whole of the country? Mm-hmm. Because I can go from New South Wales to Queensland and there were no checks done.
Gosh, that's very alarming and concerning. Thank you, Bronnie. I am going to make a point of following up with our Queensland Greens MP, Michael Berkman, to find out if we can get a more specific answer. But I would also say that the federal government, 10 years after the Royal Commission into Child Sex Abuse, has signalled an intention to create a national register. And we understand that the government are going to be consulting with states and territories over coming months, working towards that national mechanism. So I'm really happy to get a Queensland specific answer, and I contacted the Minister Walsh last week and said, please do keep us updated on that register and keep us updated on the deliberations between state and territories and the federal government, because these are exactly the types of issues that we're worried about when there's a patchwork kind of response. And I would like to think that a national commission would have oversight of each of those specific kind of state-to-state contexts. But Maddie or Rachel, feel free to jump in if there's anything else you'd like to add. Otherwise, I'll follow up with Michael Berkman and get your response. Thank you, Bronnie, and thanks for your work as an educator. All right, Maddie, did you? Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, I thought Rachel was maybe going to say something earlier. So
sorry, I didn't see that.
Please jump in.
I was just going to say that we know that, well, I should first say I'm really sorry it's happened to your son, Bronnie. It should never happen. We know that this has been a long time recommendation, and to a frustration of a lot of stakeholders, it's taken more than a decade for there to be national consistency around them. They're working with Children's Check. The Attorney General's Department has set up a unit in their department. They're overseeing the work with states and territories to work towards a uniform system. And I know it's on the agenda of the Education Ministers meeting coming up. So there is progress towards it. Has it been too slow? Absolutely. But there is some steps happening, yeah. But keeping up the pressure in that regard is definitely worthwhile. The other thing I would just say is the working with Children's Check is absolutely an important layer in keeping our children safe. The other thing I think that's really worth focusing on is creating a culture of safety within services, within teams, within services, within the sector, and how that can also be a protective factor. And when you look at the different pressures that all the workforce are under, how is that contributing or actually taking us further away from a culture of safety? So I think it's also worth looking at, there's sort of many elements to doing this, but yeah, absolutely working with Children's Check is a critical layer.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And thanks, Bronnie. The next question is there, from Carol, thank you, Carol, is there any move towards creches and perhaps early childhood education in the workplace, or something that enables parents to take their kids to work and not isolate them with strangers? Did anyone want to jump in and respond to that, to alternative models of care? I know that in some areas, I know Maddie's been working significantly on different models that might suit different areas, for example, where there are childcare deserts. But Maddie, did you want to jump in?
Well, look, I just think place-based solutions are really important. And again, I think everything we're going to answer tonight, we're going to say, and this is why a national commission would be great, because it could help oversee this. But particularly around the regional, rural and remote campaign for access, it makes total sense if a hospital has a creche on site, or maybe a school does, or there are just lots of workplaces where it makes complete and utter sense. So right now, you just have to rely on the will of an employer to do that themselves generally. But if we, again, had a commission or some kind of body that looked at not only where there is need, but also what kind of need a community has, then we could work on delivering those kinds of services as well. Because, that's also a really important part of the puzzle.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. Anasina or Rachel, did you want to jump in at all?
No, I think Maddie covered that quite comprehensively.
Yeah, and really happy to take that on to consider in the federal context. It wasn't part of our policy platform last time, Carol, but all good ideas are on the table. Thank you. Next question is from Annie. It seems to me, as an early childhood educator myself, that many of the issues would be massively improved by simply hiring more permanent staff, raising the minimum wage, and scaling with education and training as the centres I've seen are all understaffed, with many staff being casual and having no real interest in the career. They're only working in childcare as a way to retain a visa. What do you think? Do you have any plans to push for increased pay and staffing? Maybe I'll kick off and say that, yes, we have consistently supported calls for increased pay for early childhood educators. Last year, when the government proposed a 15% increase, we urged them to support a 25% increase consistent with union demands. Sadly, government and the coalition didn't support us on that. Also pushed for it to be embedded beyond that 2 years, and we'll continue to keep the pressure on around that. And so also really conscious, and I think I heard this from Parenthood too and from the Front Project, but we really think it should be a level playing field between early childhood education, primary school and secondary school, where conditions should be comparable across all. And really, when you're an educator who wants to go and educate children, your decisions shouldn't be based on where there are better working conditions or pay. It should be, which age group do you most want to educate, and there to be a level playing field. And so session planning time is, built into the conditions. Fair, equal pay, but of course above the minimum wage. It's just atrocious. They're doing the most important work possible and not being genuinely recognised for that. And we also, in our pre-election pledged my battery's getting low, an additional $10 million to implement the National Children's Education and Care Workforce Strategy, which has remained underfunded for far too long. So pay has to be on the agenda. We need to ensure that we have got a strong, robust workforce that are sort of staying in the jobs. And I think, one of the really sad realities is if we had more attention on workforce and paying conditions, maybe we wouldn't have had this alleged perpetrator move between so many centres. It's when I've got friends who are sort of scratching their head about which centre to send their kids to, I kind of say, just ask how long the educators have been there, and it's such a good indication of the support that they're provided with and the level of care that they're going to provide. But Anasina, Maddie or Rachel, do you have any contributions on that front?
Yeah, I'd also would like to add, Steph, that the parliamentary inquiry that we got over the line last week will also look at the impact of workforce conditions for our early childhood educators. So things like you mentioned, pay, job security, workload, recognition of educator wellbeing, as well as retention and service quality. These are some of the things that we're going to be looking into once the parliamentary inquiry is launched, and also around accreditation and registered training organisations as well, who I guess train and give out certificate 3s for early childhood educators. So we'll be looking at the system as a whole, how it can better support our early childhood educators and ensure that they have everything they need to be able, like you said, Steph, to do one of the most important jobs, and be treated with, dignity, value and respect whilst carrying it out as well. So those are some of the things that we're going to be looking into as part of our parliamentary inquiry.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anasina. Maddie or Rachel, did you?
Yeah, well, look, workforce is key to all of this, and particularly in order to have high quality service provision, we need to properly support our early childhood educators. It's a profession, they do incredible work. And yeah, I mean, I was up in East Gippsland a few weeks ago and met an educator, and I just said, what kind of support would you like to see for the sector to help kind of stop so many educators from leaving? And the first thing she said was just pay. And so even though the worker retention payment of 15%, which has helped, and we have seen higher rates of retention in the sector, we need to go beyond that. We're excited to see where the Fair Work Commission rulings go in terms of lifting wages even further for educators. But as you both said, it also comes back to conditions and support, mentorship can be really good, having clear professional development and pathways for educators. And part of our job at the Parenthood is also just really educating parents and carers on how we recognise the hard work educators do and respect the profession, because they're nurturing and educating the people we care about most.
And that includes you, Annie, so thank you. Looking at you. Okay, next we've got Genevieve, who's got a comment and then a question, and my phone has just flipped to a different part. Sorry, give me one moment. Uh-oh, where's the table gone? Sorry, folks. Team Steph, I think the question table has disappeared from my spreadsheet.
I can ask the question if you like.
Would you mind, Genevieve? That'd be great.
No, that's fine. Thank you, everyone, for holding tonight. It's really important, and it's nice to be in a room full of people who care so much about it. So I'm on Ghana Impairment Country in South Australia, and a hopeful candidate for the Greens for the next year's state election too. And I work in early childhood and I have a 2-year-old. So I've got lots of skin in the game, as you all do. I would love for the conversation to include, the national conversation to include supporting parents to keep their kids with them as well. Because although everything we're talking about tonight is incredibly important, and I'm really pleased to hear all the ideas and what's on the table at the moment, I would love a really bold plan that empowers parents to keep their kids with them if they choose to. Because what I see, I mean, we all unfortunately read the horrible news recently, and a 5-month-old was part of that group that was allegedly abused recently. And so thinking, why is a 5-month-old out of their parents and their family's care? That I'm assuming that it's not by choice. It's because of capitalism, which is, as we all know, the thing lurking behind so many horrible corners is, capitalist motivations that don't put humans first. So, yeah, I'd love for us as a group and for the Greens and for everyone in this sector to be actually trying to push for better care for kids with their own family members as well, which in my mind would be something like, properly funding parents. So, I mean, I know that it's increased recently, the maternity leave pay, but I'd love to see something far more ambitious on the table to, keep them with their primary attachment figures. But that's more of a comment than it is a question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And then the other thing I had just written was knowing that so many centres are for-profit centres, could we also be really ambitious and abolish them and make them all publicly owned, make them all community owned? Bronnie, you got your 2 thumbs up. I don't know what reality that would be, and with the current government, I'm not sure how they feel about, big, bold, ambitious things. I know the Greens feel more bold and ambitious often. But yeah, I'd love to hear some advocacy about that, because clearly when things are for profit, humans suffer. So they're all my comments and questions. And Thea, thanks again for the chats tonight.
Thank you so much, Genevieve, and excited to hear that you might be running as a candidate. Wonderful news. Look, on the first point, we strongly believe that parents should have the choice to do what they want with their children. We want them ultimately, if they want to go back to work, to have the choice to do that. If they don't, understand and value and recognise that as well. We've consistently called to increase, we've been calling for a universal basic income for a long time, and that means increasing all of the government payments to above the poverty line. And I can't believe it's even a debate or even a question that we have to be pushing that. It just is so very obvious that that's needed. So really, that's the key thing we're focusing on. My colleague, Senator Penny Allman-Payne in Queensland, has been running a big campaign to raise the rate. Another one you can all go and jump on and sign and contact your MPs about if you think that that's something important. And I can respond to the other one as well, but I might throw it open to others if you'd like to respond before I do.
I'm happy to jump in. And firstly, the Parenthood campaign's also for a year of paid parental leave. I mean, ideally, we'd love to see even more, but it'll take time, and we're very happy that we've got to 26 weeks, or we're getting there maybe from next year. But yeah, we'd like to see 52 weeks actually at a replacement wage. And we're also glad that we now have super on that as well. In terms of the for-profits in the early learning system, they prop up the early learning system. There's just such a huge portion of it. So they're kind of quite an important part in many ways of the system. However, no institution should be putting profit before children. And one thing that I think we really need to consider is just how schools are run. So in schools, funding needs to be reinvested in the institution. There aren't shareholders or equity partners who are profiting from the system. And that's what we'd like to see from early learning. So in that way, yeah, we could ensure high quality for children.
Thank you, Maddie. Anasina, would you like to contribute on that?
Yeah, I'll just say, just from a Victorian context, with the alleged perpetrator, a lot of the childcare centres that he would be working across, where he allegedly committed these sexual abuse, were for-profit centres. And there's always a challenge when you've got for-profit centres infiltrating the early childcare sector, because like Maddie said, it's so important that profit doesn't become the motive for caring, and that it shouldn't be trumping the care of our children. And some of these very big multinational corporate early childhood corporations, they were found for malpractice in New South Wales. The Greens here in Victoria did a motion in Parliament in June last year for the government to release documents on these specific centres, because we knew that if they were being found for malpractice in New South Wales, we needed to know what was happening here in Victoria. And sadly, what has been uncovered in the last few weeks has revealed that some of these for-profit centres are lowering their standards when it comes to child safety and putting profit before children. And that's just unacceptable. We cannot let that be the forefront of early childhood sector. They need to be held accountable. But in order for them to be held accountable, we need to make sure that we've got robust systems in place, that with checks and balances and accountability and transparency, to ensure that they're not getting away with this kind of behaviour and ways of working. So I just wanted to add that from a Victorian context there.
Yeah, thank you, Anasina. And I suppose to add, the Greens do believe that childcare should not be for profit, but we also acknowledge the reality that we're in, and that is that, I think it's more than 3/4 of long daycare centres are for profit, and we're also facing this like massive childcare deserts across the country, and we certainly don't want to, close down for profits overnight, because families simply wouldn't have those options available to them. But we know that not-for-profits consistently deliver higher quality, like generally speaking, than for-profits. And we went to the election proposing a $5 billion fund to really support not-for-profits and council-run centres to grow and to build and to establish in new areas. And we have been advocating for the beef. The $1 billion allocation that the government has announced to support childcare deserts, we would really like that to see that being spent on not-for-profit care rather than further subsidies for profit. So we also went into the election saying that if centres are being shut down for not meeting quality standards, that the government should buy them and turn them into government-run facilities. That was my question that I did ask of the department. What will you do when you have to remove the subsidy and these centres close down and there is demand? We've got waiting lists galore right across the country, and what assurance can you provide to families in that scenario? Would you consider a buyback? And they hadn't really got a plan for that. So we'll keep the pressure up and keep trying to incentivise that not-for-profit care. And just in Victoria, Anasina and I have been doing a lot of advocacy for the council community-run centres. We managed to save the Bulldogs Centre in Footscray from shifting from not-for-profit to for-profit. Community Pressure Works here in Port Phillip, we saved 3 council-run centres from being closed down with a big community campaign. So if you are, whatever state you're in, if you are hearing or finding out about centres that are looking like they're shifting or closing, feel free to contact your local Greens MP and we'll do what we can to step in and support that ongoing advocacy. We also managed to keep open Windsor Children's Centre, which is a great local centre down the road. And yeah, we absolutely need to be moving in that direction. And a shout out to, I saw another councillor, Tim Driley, on the call as well. If you are in a local council area and want some tips on what sort of campaign advocacy might work, then please do get in touch with our office. We're getting towards time, folks, so we might have to whip through the next couple of questions. We've got another one from Bronnie. You mentioned a threshold that would need to be agreed on before funding is cut. I think this is in relation to the new legislation that's gone through. Should the threshold be not meeting even just one standard, we should not be giving chances, not be giving chances that provides high motivation for, that provides high motivation for owners to do the right thing. Would anyone else like to jump in before I do? Or I think this is in relation to the threshold of when they remove the subsidy, and I think it's a really good question. And we would like to see the threshold be, quite a strict threshold to be met. But I think, again, acknowledging the fact that they didn't really have a response as to what they would do in circumstances where centres were going to need to be closed and didn't have a stopgap in place to ensure that there is care provided for those families. We really need to work through that piece of the puzzle too. ECEC Commission would help do that, circling back. And as mentioned before, we understand the decision to move the childcare subsidy. Basically, we think there needs to just be consistency and lifting those national quality standards more broadly, and a move away from for-profits, I think, will help us get to a position where we're not facing that reality. But really good question. Does anyone else want to jump in there? No? All right. And the last, I've got 2 more, but no, there's lots more. Hang on, I might just have to, any that we don't get to tonight, we will respond to in email, and I'll get others to contribute as well. So there's one for Anasina. Maybe I'll do a question for Anasina because she's wonderful. More of a statement. I'd like for the inquiry to include a design of the centres. I know it's a little bit left of field, but the amount of glass and fake grass, yes, it's all very reflective, which is really harmful. I'm a photographer and only at a centre for a day or 2 a week. These centres are new and we don't know what damage will be uncovered in the years to come. I think the architecture is an important feature. So maybe that's a statement maybe to take on board, Anasina. I'm just checking if my team want to give me, have you considered advertising the stats showing not-for-profit childcare centres having higher quality? We do say it as often as we can. Rachel, I can see an excited hand up. Do you want to jump in?
The Front Project has a report that goes exactly into this. So yeah, we've published that data. So I might quickly find the link and put it there. Yeah.
Please do. Folks, I think we're at time. So Sue, I can see your hand up as well. I've got a soft spot for Sue. So would you like to really quickly?
Thanks for having a soft spot. Look, I just thought I'd jump in because I really just wanted to listen to what everyone was saying, but I thought I'd just jump in at the end. Like Steph said, I used to be an MP at the state level. After I left Parliament, I spent a year working at Victoria University's Mitchell Institute and co-authored the Childcare Deserts report. And just listening to what everyone's saying, all roads lead back really to the for-profit model. And I heard Anasina and other people have mentioned this in various contexts about the change of the structure. And we really have to unravel that structure, because if we don't, that's the cause of the deserts, because I think someone did say that's where the profits are in the inner city and not in the outer suburbs or the regional centres. Unless government's going to step in and provide care there, that won't be provided by the for-profit sector. And also just the safety and standards, etc. So you know, we really probably need to have a conversation about trying not to put too many band-aids on the current system and thinking about actually restructuring the system to look like how we run schools in Australia and how we run kindergartens. That's
Thank you, Sue.
And I could go on, but that's it in a nutshell.
Yes, no, agree. We think it should just be like dropping a kid off at primary school, much the same for ECEC. So thank you for your work and advocacy, and thank you so much to everyone for joining. I might just give Anasina, Maddie, and is Rachel still here? Yes. Maybe like a minute, 30 seconds to a minute to some, if you want to make a few final remarks, and then we'll let people get back to their evenings. Anasina, do you want to kick us up?
Sorry, it's that awkward moment when you don't know to go first or second. I just want to acknowledge our early childhood educators in this conversation. Everybody has a role to play, but early childhood educators don't get anywhere near the recognition and the value of the work that they do. They're not just caring for our children, they are educating, they are shaping the minds of our youngest learners. And I just want to show my appreciation for them, and that the Greens will continue to hold the government to account, but also to work with the government so that we can really bring about some systemic changes that are really needed in the sector. So thanks again for being a part of this conversation. Thanks, Steph.
Thank you so much, Anasina. Over to you, Maddie.
I don't think I could put it better than that. That's so right. The early childhood educators are so important, and they do such incredible work. And yeah, that is really the first step. If we want to see high quality ECEC, let's start treating our early childhood educators better. And yeah, please check out the Parenthood website if you haven't before. We are very vocal on this issue, and we have a petition for a commission.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Rachel?
Yeah, I guess I would say, I mean, I would agree with everything, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. That there's some really good things in our early childhood education system. Vast majority of our workforce definitely part of that. There's research that proves in the Australian context that high quality ECEC benefits children, better life outcomes. So yes, while we know bad quality can harm, on the flip side, we know that good quality is so good for kids. So definitely support parent choice. And if the choice is to go to an early learning setting, let's focus on that quality uplift and work with what's working really well as well.
Thank you, Rachel, and thanks for jumping in impromptu to the conversation. Echo the words of my lovely colleagues. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you to all our educators who will be up bright and early tomorrow doing that incredibly important work. If you've got any reflections on how tonight's gone, please do get in touch with our office, or if there are other conversations that you'd be interested in us hosting or conducting, we'd really love to hear from you. Write to your local MP, tell them that you want early childhood education that's generally universal and high quality, and those support services will post again in the chat in case this conversation has brought up anything for you. Great to see you all, and thank you to my wonderful colleagues for joining. A lot of work to be done, but I reckon if there was ever a time, it's right now. Let's just embolden that government to make a big reform agenda that prioritises our kids, because if we're not in Parliament for that, then what are we there for? Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely evening.